Hollywood came to a standstill. The greatest heartthrob in cinema was in a fury. The King of Rock was at the center of a silent scandal. What few fans know is that the brief romance between Rita Moreno and Elvis Presley was not born of love. It was born of pain, disappointment, and one of the most emblematic episodes of Hollywood's golden era. Today, you will discover how this encounter not only changed the backstage history of the king, but revealed a deeply human side of Elvis Presley that few people know. Before we continue, tell me here in the comments, do you believe using a new relationship as a form of romantic revenge is understandable, or do you think it crosses the line? I really want to know your opinion, especially if you are an Elvis fan and know well the history and the era in which all this took place.
Almost no one tells you this in documentaries about the King of Rock. While Elvis was driving the world crazy with Heartbreak Hotel and beginning to dominate Hollywood, his name became tangled in an explosive love triangle with two giants of cinema, Rita Moreno and Marlon Brando. Yes, our Elvis, the boy from Memphis who became the king, was used in a revenge plan worthy of a movie script, and the story is told by Rita herself, now over 90 years old, laughing about everything she lived through. If you are an Elvis fan, stay with me until the end, because today we are going to step into the backstage of a whirlwind romance in which the king was sweet, polite, but ended up being labeled sweet but boring by the woman who earned an EGOT. Let's go back to the 1950s. In 1950s Hollywood, glamour was as intense as the pain hidden behind flawless smiles. Rita Moreno was at the beginning of a brilliant trajectory, but her heart was living a reality far removed from the red carpets. Young, talented, and determined, she had become deeply involved with Marlon Brando, one of the most magnetic and complex men of his generation. The relationship was intense and passionate, but also marked by emotional instability, insecurities, and constant frustrations. Rita would later describe this phase as a period of great turbulence, in which love and suffering walked side by side in an almost inseparable way. Brando exerted a powerful fascination over her. He was the kind of man who dominated a room simply by his presence, but at the same time did not know how to take care of what he had. His infidelities were frequent, and Rita, in love, endured in silence until one specific moment became the point of emotional rupture. When visiting Brando's home, she came across a piece of women's lingerie that clearly did not belong to her. There, without harsh words or public confrontations, the impact was devastating. The feeling of disrespect, of silent humiliation, and of losing emotional control placed her in a state of deep vulnerability. She returned home in tears, feeling small, devalued, and emotionally trapped in that cycle. In this context of fragility, Rita was not only seeking comfort, but a way to reclaim her own sense of dignity. And it is precisely at that moment that life, in an almost cinematic way, inserts Elvis Presley into her story. While Rita tried to reorganize her feelings, Elvis was living a phase of vertiginous rise. The boy from Memphis was no longer just a musical phenomenon. He was beginning to establish himself in Hollywood as a magnetic, intriguing presence, increasingly observed by major studios. During an ordinary routine behind the scenes at 20th Century Fox, Elvis spotted Rita. Enchanted by her beauty and aura, he told his manager that he would like to meet her. There was no flashy game of seduction, but rather a genuine interest. The contact was made in a formal, respectful way, as many things still worked at that time. Colonel Tom Parker stepped in and made the call. The proposal was clear. Elvis would like to take her out. He would like to get to know her better. When Rita heard the invitation, her mind was still filled with memories of recent pain. Even so, something inside her awakened not only curiosity, but also a sense of power she had not felt in a long time. Accepting that date was more than a simple yes. It was a decision that symbolized an inner movement toward her own self-worth. Although years later she admitted that part of the motivation involved making Brando jealous, there was also a silent desire to start over, to breathe away from the shadow of a love that had hurt her. Elvis, without knowing it, became a new turning point in Rita's emotional journey. For him, it may have been just another connection amid the transformations of stardom. For her, it represented a symbolic break from a painful past. And in this intersection between a wounded heart and a man who was beginning to conquer the world, one of the most curious and least explored episodes of the King of Rock's life was born. The great curiosity of this beginning is that Elvis's interest did not come from games or strategies. He was known for being observant and for acting discreetly off stage. Despite the public image of energy and magnetism, in personal contact, he was still a man raised under traditional values, influenced by the religious environment of the American South and an upbringing that carried a certain emotional conservatism. Rita, in turn, when accepting the invitation, did not see an immediate fairy tale. It was almost as if she was testing her own freedom, her ability to choose something different from the emotional routine that consumed her. Elvis's invitation emerged as an opportunity to rediscover her identity outside an oppressive relationship, and this, more than romance, is what deeply marked this first chapter. This point in the story reveals something essential about Rita and also about Elvis. She was not just a woman seeking distraction, but someone trying to rebuild her self-esteem. And he was not just an untouchable star, but a man who, even surrounded by fame, still moved with a certain delicacy behind the scenes of his personal life. It is in this setting, filled with silent emotion, internal decisions, and a veiled desire for transformation, that the brief bond between Rita Moreno and Elvis Presley begins. A bond born not of glamour, but of pain, vulnerability, and the unexpected need to begin again. The meetings between Rita Moreno and Elvis Presley began surrounded by curiosity, expectations, and an atmosphere that mixed fascination with unease. To the world, Elvis was the phenomenon that set audiences on fire, the man of irresistible presence who turned every performance into a magnetic spectacle. To Rita, however, the first contact revealed an unexpected facet. Away from the stage, he appeared gentle, polite, and surprisingly reserved. There was no overwhelming fury that the public associated with the King of Rock, but rather a cautious, almost introspective man who seemed to carry a silent weight behind his fame. Rita quickly realized that Elvis did not behave like the traditional Hollywood heartthrobs, always confident and dominant. He had a different manner, more contained, more respectful, almost as if he felt insecure at certain moments. His posture was courteous, his words measured, and his gestures delicate. It was a striking contrast to the public image of explosive sensuality that consecrated him on screen and on stage. This contrast, though intriguing, also created a certain emotional distance between them. As they went out a few times, Rita began to understand that Elvis did not carry the chaotic intensity that had marked her previous relationship. He was not the type of man who dove into confrontations or psychological games. On the contrary, there was a softness in his presence that, for many, would be charming, but to her sounded almost like a lack of emotional fire. It was in this context that the famous description she would later share arose, calling Elvis sweet but predictable. It was not a cruel criticism, but an honest observation of how he presented himself outside the spectacle. These meetings took place at a time when Elvis was beginning to consolidate himself as an actor, exploring a new territory in his career. His routine was intense, surrounded by commitments, recordings, meetings, and the constant pressure of the industry. Even so, he made time for these moments with Rita, always maintaining respectful behavior. There were no excesses, scandals, or impulsive attitudes. What existed was an almost old-fashioned cordiality, reminiscent of a young man raised in a conservative family environment. Rita, on the other hand, was living a much more turbulent internal process. Still healing from the wounds left by her previous relationship, she observed in Elvis a tranquility that could not fill the emotional void she carried. She was not just seeking company, but a deep connection, something that could bring the emotional fire she lacked. Elvis, with his restrained manner, did not fit that expectation. He seemed more comfortable in a sphere of silent care than in a passionate explosion. She realized that, despite the charm and gentleness, there was a kind of invisible barrier. Elvis seemed hesitant to move forward emotionally, as if something prevented him from fully giving himself. Perhaps it was the weight of his religious upbringing, perhaps the constant surveillance around his life, or perhaps simply his reserved personality. Whatever the reason, the relationship remained in a safe, almost protective territory, but far from what Rita understood as overwhelming passion. And here is where I want to hear from you as well. In your view as a fan, does this more restrained, polite, and insecure side of Elvis make you admire his humanity even more? Or do you feel it slightly breaks the image of the irresistible king that was built over the years? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and tell us how you feel when discovering this contrast between the myth and the man. Meanwhile, the impact of this involvement was beginning to echo through Hollywood. The mere fact that Rita was dating Elvis already sparked comments, glances, and speculation. To many, it was the meeting of two powerful worlds, the sophisticated actress and the star who revolutionized music. But for Rita, the meeting was more intimate, more connected to her own need to rebuild her sense of worth and autonomy. She began to realize that although Elvis represented a new possibility, he also symbolized something temporary in her life. He was not the great love, nor the emotional safe haven. He was, in a way, a transitional chapter, a moment in which she tested new paths while healing old wounds. There was affection, but not enough depth to sustain something lasting. Even so, Rita would always remember this period with respect and tenderness. Elvis was not a man who hurt her, nor someone who left negative marks on her history. On the contrary, she recognized in him a rare sensitivity and an education that few possessed in that environment. He was gentle, attentive, someone who treated women with delicacy, and this would remain in her memory as a genuine quality. Throughout these encounters, Rita understood that Elvis was a mystery in himself. A man who could set crowds on fire, but who, in intimacy, seemed trapped by invisible limits. This duality intrigued her, but also reinforced the sense that the relationship would not evolve. Not due to lack of respect, but because their emotional natures moved in different directions. This brief romance reveals a rare facet of the King of Rock. It shows a silent, vulnerable, human Elvis, distant from the myth and closer to a young man trying to find balance in the midst of the whirlwind of fame. For Rita, it was a meaningful but not transformative encounter. For Elvis, it was just another discrete chapter in a life that was beginning to be intensely observed by the world. And so, between gentle meetings, restrained conversations, and unfulfilled expectations, the bond between Rita Moreno and Elvis Presley unfolded as a delicate passage, an episode that, even far from a great romance, carried within it a subtle beauty, that of two human beings trying to understand their own feelings amid the relentless glow of Hollywood. The third act of this story is not built upon the romance itself, but upon what it reveals about Elvis Presley and how this brief episode fits into his human and artistic journey. The involvement with Rita Moreno was not a lasting romantic milestone, but it became a rare window into who Elvis was away from the stage, away from the spotlight, and distant from the narrative created by the industry. At that time, Elvis was already seen as an irresistible phenomenon, a cultural force that transformed behavior, fashion, language, and even the way youth expressed themselves. Yet, beneath the surface of the vibrant idol, there existed a man marked by insecurities, conservative values, and an emotional complexity that often went unnoticed by the general public. His contact with Rita brought this duality to light. While the world saw the untamed king, she met the gentle, careful man, almost shy in certain situations. This contrast between the public Elvis and the private Elvis helps explain why so many accounts describe him as deeply polite, sensitive, and even introspective.
He did not behave like an aggressive conqueror. On the contrary, he showed respect, caution, and an almost delicate care for those around him. This posture, seen by Rita, reinforces the perception that his sensuality on stage was a powerful artistic performance, but not necessarily a literal reflection of his personal intimacy.
The relationship with Rita also shows how Elvis, even surrounded by constant attention, did not indulge in emotional games or sentimental theatrics. He did not try to turn her into another trophy, nor did he make that involvement a spectacular narrative. Everything was discreet, contained, almost silent. This approach reveals an emotional maturity that is often not associated with an icon of his magnitude. For Rita, the encounter was significant as part of her journey of personal reconstruction. For Elvis, it was a fragment that dissolved into the flow of his rising career, but one that left subtle traces of mutual tenderness and respect. He did not hurt, exploit, or dramatize. He simply remained himself, a man who, despite his status, was still trying to understand his own feelings amid an increasingly complex life. This episode also helps reinforce a central idea about Elvis, his humanity. Behind the legend existed someone who felt, hesitated, and carried doubts and insecurities. Someone who did not live only through passionate outbursts, but through silences, restrained gestures, and a sensitivity often ignored by popular discourse. The relationship with Rita highlights precisely this, the presence of a softer, less performative, more genuine side. Over the years, fans and researchers began to see this intimate dimension of the King of Rock more clearly. Rita Moreno's story, told with serenity and respect, helped further humanize his image. There is no scandal, no exploitation, just the sincere account of an encounter that, though brief, revealed deep nuances of his personality. The legacy of this episode does not lie in the romance that could have been, but in the expanded understanding of who Elvis truly was. He was not only the man who dominated crowds with a simple movement of his hips, he was also someone who possessed delicacy, care, and a sense of respect that permeated his personal relationships. This combination of artistic power and human fragility is what makes him so eternal. Elvis became a figure that transcends generations precisely because he carried this duality. He was myth and man, spectacle and silence, intensity and restraint. And it is within this paradox that his true greatness resides. The story with Rita does not diminish his aura, but enriches it, showing that even the King of Rock lived encounters that spoke more of humanity than of glamour. When observing this chapter through a mature lens, one realizes it reveals something greater about the culture of the time itself, about how celebrities navigated relationships in a universe dominated by expectations, pressures, and rigid standards. Elvis, in this context, does not emerge as a villain nor as a romantic hero, but as a man navigating his own emotions in a world that demanded constant perfection. This brief bond also helps us understand how Elvis dealt with intimacy. He did not seem to seek unrestrained intensity, but rather security, affection, and emotional structure. This would become even more evident in other phases of his life, where the search for emotional stability intertwined with the demands of an overwhelming career. Rita always preserved the dignity of this story, never exposing Elvis in a sensationalist way. Her account is serene, respectful, almost affectionate, as if acknowledging that a genuine moment existed there, even if not definitive. This posture reinforces how Elvis left positive impressions even in encounters that did not become great romances. In the end, what remains is the awareness that this episode is not about scandal, but about human experience. It is about two individuals who crossed paths at a delicate moment in their lives, carrying expectations, pain, and silent attempts at understanding. And at the center of it all, an artist whose light continues to cross time. The legacy of this moment is not the absence of a great love, but the presence of a deeper understanding of Elvis Presley. He was more than the artist who revolutionized music. He was a complex, gentle human being, divided between the glow of the stage and the vulnerability of the heart.
And perhaps that is exactly what makes him unforgettable.
And thus ends another little-known but deeply revealing chapter of the life of the King of Rock. Not a story of scandal, but a sensitive portrait of who Elvis Presley was away from the spotlight. A gentle, complex human man who lived encounters marked by respect, delicacy, and silences that speak louder than 1,000 headlines. If you are truly an Elvis fan, if his voice has already shaped your days, if every chord still sends shivers through your soul, then this channel is your place. Here, we preserve the memory of the king with care, depth, and respect, revealing stories that go far beyond the stage. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this more intimate and little explored side of Elvis? Did you already know this story with Rita Moreno? Leave your comments below, join the conversation with other fans, and share your impressions. And if this content touched you in any way, do not let it stop here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell so you do not miss any new stories, and share it with other lovers of the King of Rock. The more people unite, the stronger the legacy of Elvis Presley becomes. Because the stage may fall silent, but the legend never stops vibrating in our hearts.